Have you tried out ink blending and you find that you're not quite getting the result that other people are getting? Well, stay tuned because I'm going to give you lots of hints and tips for getting perfect blends every time. Now I'm going to be using distress oxides for this, but I'm going to go through things like matching your colours up, the way in which you blend on your cardstock or your paper, and more great tips and techniques. Stay tuned for the end because I think you're going to absolutely love the last tip. So the first one is probably really quite obvious, but if you haven't thought of it, then this could be causing you some muddy colours, and that's by keeping your brushes as separate as possible. Now, we have some fantastic blending brushes available at CraftStash. We'll make sure those that are linked down below for you, but obviously we understand everyone has a budget and you can't possibly have one brush for every colour. So as long as you can keep one brush for each colour range, and make sure you clean it. So take yourself a dry cloth and just give it a good rub to take any excess off before you put it away. That should prevent any of the transfer onto the next project. Now let's think about colours and which colours you're actually blending into which. So for example, I'm going to now blend Victorian Velvet, which is a lovely soft pink. And I'm going to take that into Aged Mahogany. So this is a really beautiful burgundy colour. Now the two of these are close together on the colour wheel. I'll just pop the colour wheel up here actually for you so I can talk through it with you. So as you can see, we've got these two are almost the same colour but different shades of. And when I work on that blending line between the two, which I'm going to do now, just working through the centre, you see we get a beautiful seamless blend. Any patchiness you might be experiencing is simply because some of the ink is still wet where some of it has started to dry. So you see that shine, that's the wet ink. Once that is dry, you're going to get a lovely frosted look with the oxides. Now let's take a look at two colours on this colour wheel that aren't next to each other. So take a look at whereabouts blue is. This is a particularly bright blue. And then take a look at where orange is, which is the other colour that I'm going to attempt to blend into this. While you can, with a lot of work, usually blend most colours in together, if they're so far apart on the colour wheel, you're really going to have a lot of issues. So here I'm attempting to blend the blue and orange together, but I'm just getting a green in the middle, and it's really hard to get, even with tiny circles, which I'll talk about in just a moment. It's really hard to get this blending nicely. I keep applying more ink to try and see if that helps. It's just not working. So what would I do in this instance? Because if I really want to use this particular blue and I really want to use this particular orange, well, to be honest, the answer has just literally spelled itself out to you. You need a middleman. You need a middle colour to transition from one into the other. And here, it's going to be green. So choose yourself a green that you like, one that you'd be happy with. And let's flip this over. Now, how do I know that's going to be green though? Well, if you think about it, orange, think about your primary colours. So orange is closest to yellow as a primary colour. So we'll say this is yellow, this is blue. So which colour goes between those? Which colour will take both yellow and blue? Well, there it's green. So if I was trying to work red into blue, I would go with a purple in the middle. So first things first, I've laid down my green layer. Now I've not been precise about the edges. We're going to be blending these in. So let's go on to our blue next, and let's pop our blue onto this end. So then into my orange, and this is going to be so much easier to blend into the green than the blue was. Now when you feel like you've done as much blending as you possibly can, you might think it actually still looks patchy, and that's those damp patches. So leave that to dry, set it aside. Don't keep working over the top of it. You're just going to add more damp ink. And you can see that in about 5-10 minutes, that will have gone lovely and creamy, kind of frosted look over it as well because of the oxides, and you'll get a really nice blend. Now you may have actually noticed during the last part of the video that I actually switched up my brush a little way through blending, and that's because this brush became overloaded with ink and it needs a wash. Now I mentioned earlier about if you're mixing up your colours with your brushes to make sure you clean off any excess, but you also need to do the same with brushes even if you do have a separate one for each colour, This is what an overload looks like. So the bristles start to stick together. There's just too much in there. It needs a really good clean with warm soapy water and left to air dry. So you can see the difference there with my newer brush. You can see that the bristles are not clumped together. They don't have big gaps in them, and they're much, much smoother and softer than these ones are. Now, I mentioned working in circles, and this doesn't just go for blending, it actually goes for applying your ink in any situation. So first of all, I'm going to start putting my ink on in swipes. And you can see here, as the brush stops and moves to another direction, you actually get darker edges and this paler strip down the middle. Now that's not going to work, but also because I'm not going over and over an area, I'm not capturing all of the grain of the paper, so you actually get this sort of white grain coming through. Now if you think about cardstock and paper, even the most smooth cardstock still has a slight grain to it, and it's those raised grain edges that you need to capture every angle of with your brush or your foam applicator. So let me just show you by working around in circles, and the same reason really that I actually apply my ink in circles, so I capture all the angles of the bristles there too. So already, just by doing a few circles, hopefully you can see there that I've got a much smoother and more solid application of colour than I did have here. If, like me, you like to ink the edges of your pattern papers or your cardstock to give it a bit of a frame, then you might be using your blending inks for this. And the best way to do that is to actually take a blending mat. We've got these again linked down below. We have some wonderful ones at CraftStash under the Creative Craft products range. We have them in 6 by 6 inches and A4 in a pack together, so they cover whatever size project you're working on. And what we tend to do is actually apply your ink directly to your mat first and then swipe onto the cardstock, and you'll see that you actually get a much softer blend with this. So if I just work round a little bit of my cardstock here, now my aged mahogany is a new ink pad, and this one is really juicy, so I've got a lot of ink here, but you can see you can just gently build up the colour around the edge. Now if I turn over and I come to this corner, but instead of going onto the mat, if I go straight on to the cardstock, there's nowhere for me to blend off from, and I'm getting a much bigger colour. Now even working in circles, I can't keep that edge limited. I'm having to work on there, and I've also got a really dark patch in the corner where I've put my ink directly onto the paper. So that being the reason, you really want to be working off of a blending mat if you're looking to just touch the edges. So my last tip for you is to prevent those finger marks when you're holding your wet ink, your wet panel, and trying to carry on blending. Now you want to blend whilst the ink is still wet, absolutely, but of course holding it with your fingers is only going to cause fingerprints. So I simply wrap a piece of cardstock around the end that's wet, and I use this to hold it down, and that means no transfer of my finger oils and no transfer of ink to my fingers either. So there's my top mistakes that you might be making whilst you're ink blending. Please do check out our other videos which include ink blending and other craft techniques on our channel here, and we think you're going to absolutely love this video picked for you just here.